Your kind may polish the silver, but you will never own the table. The sentence rang out like a sentence passed down from a judge, cold and deliberate. In the ballroom of the Stanton family's annual gala, beneath crystal chandeliers and oil portraits of ancestors, a woman in a golden embroidered gown lifted her hand and slapped Maya Jordan across the face. Gasps erupted. Glasses froze midair. Every jewel-encrusted guest in the room turned, their eyes narrowing with the same message. She does not belong here. But Maya did not stagger. She did not bow her head. She stood in her blue silk gown as if anchored to the marble floor itself, a living contradiction to their insult. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to Maya. She had walked into this room expecting whispers, perhaps stares. What she did not expect was a hand across her cheek before the orchestra had even finished its opening piece. Maya Jordan, 42 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Jordan Technologies, carried more wealth than the chandelier above her was worth, yet in this moment she was treated as an intruder at her own negotiation. The Stanton family had built their fortune across generations of steel and banking. Tonight was meant to seal a $2.9 billion merger between her empire and theirs. But to them, her presence was not legacy, not leadership, only a disruption of their image. Phones began to rise. Guests in black gowns and navy suits whispered, some in disbelief, others in quiet approval. Who let her in here? She must be a +1. No real partner would arrive without a family crest. Their words sliced sharper than glass, but Maya's silence was heavier than any outburst. She had learned long ago that power does not announce itself. It waits, it listens, and then it strikes at the precise moment. Tonight, that patience would be tested in front of cameras, witnesses, and an entire dynasty too blind to see the storm they had just invited. What they mistook for submission was calculation, the same calculation that had carried her from being dismissed at 23 by a venture capitalist who told her, "You people are high risk," to building a company valued in the tens of billions. And now, as she stood with the sting of the slap cooling on her skin, Maya knew one truth. This gala would not end with their applause. It would end with their downfall. The Stanton ballroom pulsed with silence after the slap, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. Maya Jordan did not move. Her hands remained at her sides, her chin level, her gaze unbroken. That composure unsettled the very people who had tried to reduce her. To them, power was loud, ostentatious, and gilded. Yet here she stood, a black woman in a simple blue silk gown, refusing to shrink under their spectacle. The matriarch who struck her adjusted her bracelet, a diamond bangle that sparkled under the chandelier as if the stone itself approved of her cruelty. She smirked, her voice pitched high enough for the front rows to hear. Now perhaps someone will escort this woman back where she belongs. A murmur rippled through the room. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. But the consensus, unspoken and clear, was that she did not belong at the center of their empire. A young man in a tuxedo whispered to his date, "She must be staff who wandered too far." Another leaned closer to the buffet, muttering, "It is embarrassing they let her in." Maya let the words wash over her like cold rain. She had been here before, though never under such light. At 24 years old, she had stood outside her first investment pitch, only to be told that her presence made the partners uneasy. At 30, she had been advised to bring a white male face to negotiate deals on her behalf. Each slight had hardened into armor, invisible but unshakable. That armor was wrapped around her now. Still, the indignity tonight pressed deeper. This was not a back room or a casual slight at a board meeting. This was a ballroom, packed with senators, bankers, athletes, and celebrities, all of them witnesses to a single slap that carried centuries of contempt. And in that moment, Maya understood why she had chosen to arrive without bodyguards, without jewelry, without a visible emblem of wealth. She had wanted to see them unmasked, and now she saw them clearly. At the edge of the room, a waiter froze with a tray of champagne flutes, his eyes locked on her. A young woman in a silver gown held her phone low at her hip, the red recording light flickering like a warning flare. Every second, more lenses were turning her way. The story was no longer theirs to script. Maya breathed once. steady and measured. She did not shout. She did not plead. She simply stood, letting the weight of their insult settle. Around her, the grandeur of the Gala crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, a string quartet playing in the corner suddenly felt like a cage. And in that gilded cage, she was not the prisoner. She was the storm they had summoned without knowing. What none of them understood yet was that the real reckoning had already begun. The tension cracked wider when Charles Stanton, the family patriarch, rose from his front row seat. His tuxedo jacket gleamed with medals from charities he had never truly funded, and his posture carried the arrogance of a man who had never been challenged in public. He stepped into the center of the ballroom, his voice carrying over the string quartet that faltered mid-song. "This charade has gone far enough," he declared. "Who allowed this woman into our circle? This is a private celebration, not an open invitation. You are humiliating yourself by standing here, and you are humiliating us by not leaving." The guests stirred. Some laughed, others sipped their wine as if watching theater, not injustice. The orchestra ceased entirely, and the silence pressed in like velvet suffocation. Maya Jordan remained still. Her cheek still bore the faint flush from the slap, but her eyes burned with steadiness. She did not respond. She had learned that silence can strike harder than rebuttal. Charles Stanton leaned closer, his words sharp and deliberate. "You think wealth buys you a seat here? Wealth without lineage is a counterfeit crown. This family does not deal with imposters. Walk out now, or the deal will never see daylight." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Guests who had traveled from Los Angeles, New York, and London knew exactly what he meant. The $2.9 billion merger was the centerpiece of this gala, whispered about for months, the kind of transaction that could shift entire markets. To hear him dismiss it in a single breath left many clutching their glasses tighter. Near the back, a junior senator whispered to a colleague, "Is he serious? Canceling a deal that size over this spectacle?" The colleague replied, "He is a Stanton. Pride comes first. Profit comes later." A woman in emerald green leaned to her husband and muttered, "She looks too calm. That is unsettling." Maya finally moved, not with words but with presence. She lifted her chin slightly, her gaze sweeping the room. Dozens of eyes looked away under the weight of her stare. She remembered being 25, walking into a bank with her first successful earnings, only to have the teller question if the account was really hers. That same gaze of disbelief now surrounded her again, amplified by chandeliers, by velvet, by champagne. Charles did not stop. "If security does not escort you out, I will do it myself," he barked. He snapped his fingers toward a cluster of uniformed staff at the edge of the ballroom. The command carried not authority, but desperation disguised as power. And in that moment, with the crowd holding its collective breath, it became clear this was no longer a gala. It was a trial by prejudice, staged for an audience that did not know the verdict was already written. The guards hesitated at first, their black uniforms stiff against the golden glow of the chandeliers. They looked from Charles Stanton to Maya Jordan, as if uncertain whom they truly served in that moment. The patriarch's command still hung in the air, sharp as glass. Yet Maya did not flinch. She did not even shift her weight. She stood rooted, calm, her silence pressing against the arrogance of the room like a wall. Whispers thickened. "Why is she not defending herself?" one guest muttered. Another hissed. She should be begging, not staring. The cruelty of their words was meant to pierce her. But she had long ago built armor from years of such moments. Silence was not weakness. Silence was steel. Charles Stanton's eldest son stepped forward now, his voice louder than his father's, laced with mockery. "This is the gala of a dynasty, not a charity for strays. Leave with what dignity you have left, before we take even that." His words drew laughter from a small circle of allies near the stage. Their pearls and cufflinks glinted like teeth. Maya's response was no response at all. Her stillness became its own spectacle. Her eyes, steady and deliberate, met those of the guards who had taken a step closer. For a moment, one of them faltered, lowering his gaze, almost ashamed. It was not the defiance of a protest that unsettled them. It was the restraint of a woman who refused to descend to their level. At the edge of the ballroom, the young woman in silver, phone still at her hip, whispered into her recording, "She is not breaking. She is not even raising her voice." The red light blinked on, capturing a narrative the Stantons had not scripted. The matriarch who had struck Maya earlier leaned back in her chair, smug, her hand resting on her champagne flute. "You see, she said loudly. She cannot even speak for herself. That is the measure of her kind. The words rippled like acid through the hall. Maya's breath remained even. Her silence was not surrender. It was preparation. She thought of her first conference at 27 years old, when a panelist told her she was too soft-spoken to lead a company. She had smiled then, as she smiled now inside, knowing that power does not roar, it waits. The room grew restless. A senator shifted in his chair. A professional athlete frowned from his table. Even a few investors glanced at each other with unease. The spectacle was unraveling. What was intended as humiliation was turning into revelation, and the longer Maya Jordan stood unbroken, the more the arrogance of the Stantons looked like desperation. And in that suspended moment, the gala did not feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a courtroom, and Maya's silence was the gavel they all feared would fall. It was a single voice that cracked the performance. From the far edge of the ballroom, a young man in a black suit raised his phone, the red light steady and unmistakable. "I am recording this," he said, his voice trembling but loud enough for several tables to hear. Heads turned sharply. The Stantons bristled. And for the first time that evening, the weight of witnesses shifted. Another sound followed, soft but clear. "This is wrong." It came from a woman in her 30s, a guest in a navy gown seated 2 tables from the stage. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as she spoke. "You all saw what just happened." She was slapped, humiliated, and not once did she raise her voice. "How can you sit here and pretend this is acceptable?" A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Some glanced at the exits, unwilling to be complicit. Others raised their glasses higher, trying to drown shame with champagne. But the tide had begun to turn. Charles Stanton snapped his fingers again, louder this time. "Remove her before this farce grows larger. Do not let these parasites infect our night." His words drew a sharp inhale from several guests. One older man in the back muttered, "He just said parasites." Another whispered, "Did you hear that? He said it out loud." Ugh. The young woman in silver, her phone still recording, spoke up now. "She has a name, Maya Jordan, and I know because I read it on the program. She is not a guest by mistake. She is the deal maker." That sentence landed like thunder. The air thickened. Suddenly, the insult was no longer just casual cruelty. It was targeted contempt against the very person whose signature could decide the future of the Stanton Empire. Guests shifted, suddenly calculating reputations, investments, headlines. The matriarch scoffed, waving her hand as if brushing away smoke. "Names can be forged, money can be borrowed, but blood cannot be faked. She is not one of us." But already, more phones were lifted. The sound of cameras clicking became its own chorus. The humiliation the Stantons tried to orchestrate was dissolving under the light of public record. Maya Jordan did not move. She did not need to. For every whisper of cruelty, there was now a counterpoint, a witness, a voice that refused to be silent. A gala that had begun as a stage for opulence was transforming into a courtroom of truth, and the jury was no longer the Stantons. It was the crowd, the cameras, the millions who would soon see this footage. The storm was no longer approaching. It was already in the room, and the Stanton family had not yet realized they were standing in its eye. The Stanton son, emboldened by his father's rage, stepped forward once more. His cufflinks caught the chandelier light as he pointed at Maya Jordan. "This is absurd. She is no more a partner than the waitstaff behind the bar. End this spectacle and get her out. Now." His tone was sharp, but beneath the bravado, there was a flicker of unease. The crowd murmured. A man in a gray suit whispered, "Why has she not denied it? Why has she not protested?" Another answered, "Because she does not have to." That second voice carried weight, quiet but undeniable. Then came the escalation that shifted the air entirely. The matriarch rose from her chair, her hand still wrapped around the stem of her champagne glass. "Enough," she declared. "She is a fraud, and we will not allow her to poison our family name with lies. Tear up that contract now." With deliberate force, she reached for the gilded folder on the table beside her, the folder that held the draft of the $2.9 billion merger. In front of hundreds of eyes, she ripped the first page down the middle. Paper tore, sharp and final, its sound slicing through the music and chatter like a blade. Gasps scattered across the ballroom. Some guests pressed hands to their mouths. A senator muttered, "She just destroyed the contract." A financier leaned back, stunned. Do they even understand what they are doing? Charles Stanton smirked, mistaking cruelty for control. There, it is finished. No more deal, no more pretense. Escort her out before the rest of this circus grows. He gestured to security again, his voice breaking slightly under the strain of his own fury. A murmur swelled louder, this time not in support but in disbelief. Guests who had come to witness history realized they were witnessing self-destruction. Investors who had traveled across states shifted uncomfortably. Cameras recorded every rip of paper, every word of insult, every ounce of venom. Maya Jordan remained unmoved. She did not lift a hand to save the contract. She did not utter a plea for reason. Her stillness was heavier than their arrogance, her silence sharper than their commands. She remembered at 30 years old when a bank executive laughed at her application for expansion, telling her, "You people do not think in billions." Tonight, a family drunk on power had made the same mistake. At the back of the hall, a man whispered into his phone, "This is going viral." They just tore up a billion-dollar deal on camera. The young woman in silver, still recording, added softly, "They have no idea who they are humiliating." The grandeur of the gala no longer shimmered. The chandeliers did not glow, they glared. The velvet curtains did not soften, they suffocated. And the Stantons, certain they had silenced her, had instead written the prelude to their own undoing. The moment the contract shredded into the air, a new wave of arrogance swept across the Stanton circle. Charles Stanton's voice boomed like a gavel. "You heard her. This is finished. Get her out. This gala is no place for her." His tone was not just command. It was insult sharpened into law. Two security officers stepped forward, their shoes echoing against the marble floor. Their expressions betrayed hesitation, but their training told them to obey the family that signed their paychecks. The room leaned in, 100 glittering faces hungry for humiliation disguised as order. Then the words that pierced deeper than the slap. The matriarch sneered, her lips curling with disdain. "These imposters always think wealth makes them equal. It never does. Not in this family, not in this country." Her voice dripped with venom. Every syllable meant to reduce Maya Jordan to a shadow in her own story. The crowd gasped. A man at the back whispered, "She said that out loud." Another replied, "She just destroyed their reputation with one sentence." Phones tilted higher. Cameras zoomed in closer. The humiliation intended for Maya was turning into a live archive of prejudice. One of the guards reached for her arm. Maya did not move. She did not shrink back. Her voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the ballroom. "Do not touch me." It was not a plea. It was a warning. The guard froze, his hand hovering inches away, caught between loyalty and conscience. A woman in a burgundy gown stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is disgraceful. She came here as your partner. You invited her. And now this?" Her voice shook with fury. Guests turned toward her, surprised that someone had spoken truth aloud. The young man with the phone whispered, "Finally." But Charles Stanton roared louder. "You will not defend her. She is nothing but a fraud parading in silk. She does not belong among real families of power." He gestured again to the guards, his face flushed red with rage. The orchestra, silent since the slap, shifted uncomfortably. One violinist set his bow down, unwilling to play a note in a hall drenched with contempt. Maya's eyes swept the room once, steady and unyielding. The sting of insult was not new. At 20 years old, she had been turned away from a country club where she was invited as a guest, told bluntly, "Your membership must be a mistake." At 32, an investor whispered behind closed doors, "She is brilliant, but can we trust someone like her with this scale?" Tonight, those echoes were alive again, spoken not in whispers but into microphones of phones held high. The gala was no longer a celebration. It had transformed into an indictment. Every cruel word, every hateful gesture, every command shouted in arrogance was being recorded, sealed into history. And the Stanton family, blinded by pride, could not see that the trial they staged for Maya Jordan was in fact the trial of themselves. Maya Jordan finally moved. Her hand slipped calmly into the side of her gown, not in panic but in precision. She drew out her phone, the glass screen catching the light of the chandelier above. The ballroom seemed to exhale all at once, dozens of eyes narrowing, phones already raised to capture what she might do next. She did not record. She did not plead. She pressed a single button, lifted the phone to her ear, and spoke with a steadiness that made the room colder. Activate protocol. Begin internal lockdown. Timestamp this moment. On the other end, a voice replied instantly, crisp and professional. Confirmed. The system is live. Shall I notify legal counsel? Stand by, Maya answered. Her words carried more weight than the matriarch's slap or Charles Stanton's barked orders. For the first time, the arrogance at the center of the room faltered. What are you doing? Charles demanded, his voice pitched higher than before. He stepped closer, his authority cracking. Are you threatening us? Because threats will not save you here. Maya did not turn her head. She did not even grant him the dignity of a glance. Her eyes stayed on the crowd, on the witnesses holding phones, on the history being written in real time. The matriarch scoffed, shaking her head. Pathetic. She calls for help as if anyone cares. This is our house, our name, our stage. She sipped her champagne with a trembling hand, too proud to admit she was rattled. A murmur spread wider now. One man whispered. She said protocol. What does that mean? A younger guest muttered. It sounds official. The woman in silver gown, still recording, leaned to her companion. Watch closely. Something is coming. The two security guards stood frozen, their orders colliding with doubt. One finally asked, Ma'am, do you want us to proceed? His voice carried to the crowd. The matriarch opened her mouth to answer, but Maya spoke before she could. No one touches me tonight, Maya said softly. The words did not shout, but they landed heavier than a scream. The guard lowered his hand. For the first time, whispers shifted in her favor. She is calm. Too calm, one guest said. Another murmured, I think she knows something they do not. Maya's thumb pressed another command into her phone. Notify the boardroom. Suspend Stanton negotiations effective immediately. Lock every access point until my authorization. Her assistant's voice echoed clear. Confirmed. Negotiations suspended. System secured. Every word and video clip from this event is now logged. Oh. Gasps spread like fire. The Stanton family looked around, suddenly uncertain, suddenly aware that their stage was no longer private. The gala had become evidence. The humiliation they thought they orchestrated was being cataloged, archived, and sealed with legal precision. And in that moment, the arrogance of the dynasty began to crack, one splinter at a time. The storm was no longer invisible. It had a voice, it had a record, and it was moving under Maya Jordan's command. The ballroom froze as if someone had drawn a curtain of silence across the marble floor. Maya Jordan lowered her phone, her calm voice still echoing in the minds of those who had heard it. The Stanton family, once swollen with confidence, now wore the unease of gamblers who suddenly realized the game was not theirs to control. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished stone like a metronome of judgment. Her gaze swept over the chandeliers, the velvet drapes, the 100 jeweled eyes that had watched her humiliation. Then she spoke, her voice clear enough to carry to the farthest table. You wanted me out of this room. You told me I do not belong here. But what you failed to see is that this entire deal belongs to me. The pen that signs it, the funds that make it real, the authority that validates it. All of it begins and ends with me. Gasps scattered like glass shattering. Guests shifted in their seats, murmurs colliding into a chorus of disbelief. One man whispered to his wife, She just said she controls the deal. The young woman in silver gown raised her phone higher, her eyes wide. Charles Stanton's face drained of color, though his pride refused to collapse. Lies, he snapped. You are a con artist with a stolen invitation. You think you can stand here and rewrite reality? Maya did not blink. I am not rewriting reality. I am reminding you who holds it. The matriarch laughed, a hollow sound that cracked under its own weight. Nonsense. This room knows the Stantons. They know our power. No one believes you. But already the cracks were widening. A senator rose from his chair, his voice firm. I read the contract earlier. It was signed Jordan Technologies Incorporated. That is her name on it. He pointed toward Maya with deliberate clarity. The matriarch faltered, her champagne flute trembling. Charles barked, Sit down, Senator. This is not your concern. Yet another voice joined, a financier with sharp glasses. It is all of our concern. If she is the signatory, then tearing up that contract means nothing. The authority lies with her. The room swayed, not physically but morally. Witnesses who had once been silent now began to choose sides. Cameras shifted, phones captured every angle, and the Stantons stood at the center of a storm they no longer commanded. Maya took another step, her voice steady and cutting. For years, people like you mistook my silence for submission. Tonight, you will learn it was calculation, because one slap just cost you $2.9 billion. The words fell like a hammer. Some guests gasped aloud, others clapped in disbelief, while the Stantons stood frozen, caught in the glare of a truth they could not erase. The trial they staged had just flipped. The defendant had become the judge, and the verdict had begun to echo through every corner of the Stanton ballroom. The Stanton family's faces drained of the color that pride had once painted. Charles Stanton opened his mouth to speak, but no words arrived. His authority, so absolute only minutes ago, trembled in silence. The matriarch clutched her chair as if it were the last thing keeping her upright. Their guests no longer looked at Maya Jordan with suspicion. They looked at the Stantons with disbelief. Around the ballroom, conversations broke into open chaos. "She owns the deal," one man said loudly. "They just humiliated the very woman who controls their future." Another voice, this time from the back, added, "If this reaches the markets, the Stanton name is finished." The young woman in silver gown turned her phone toward her own face, whispering into her live stream, "You are watching history right now." They tried to erase her, but the truth just detonated. Her stream comments scrolled so fast her screen glowed like fire. The guards who had been ordered to remove Maya stood frozen. One quietly stepped back, as though distance might erase his complicity. The other kept his head bowed, his shoulders heavy with regret. Maya Jordan did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her presence now carried the weight of every silent witness, of every phone that had captured the slap, the insults, the arrogance. She turned slightly, addressing the crowd rather than the Stantons. "You all saw what was done to me tonight. You saw the hand that struck me, the words that sought to reduce me. You saw contracts torn, dignity denied, and cruelty applauded. But you also saw me stand still, because power does not need to roar to be real. It only needs to endure until truth speaks louder than lies." Applause cracked like thunder from one corner of the room, startling even those who had been ready to remain silent. A group of younger investors clapped openly, their eyes burning with something close to admiration. The ripple spread, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the sound of hands colliding filled the velvet chamber. The matriarch stood, her voice shrill and desperate. "Stop this at once. She is manipulating you. Do not fall for this performance." But even as she shouted, her words fell flat against the rising tide. One guest, an older woman in pearls, shook her head firmly. "This is no performance. This is justice being revealed." Charles Stanton slammed his fist against the table, but the crack of knuckles on wood sounded less like dominance and more like a plea for control he no longer had. His empire was slipping not in boardrooms or balance sheets, but in the judgment of the very people who mattered most witnesses. The air in the ballroom was no longer heavy with intimidation. It was charged with awakening. And in that storm, Maya Jordan stood as the calm center, the storm's eye, the undeniable truth the Stantons could no longer silence. The chandeliers above seemed to dim, not from lack of light, but from the weight of the moment. Charles Stanton's empire was unraveling in front of him. The matriarch gripped her champagne glass so tightly her knuckles whitened, her lips trembling with rage. But Maya Jordan stood unmoved, her presence now the anchor in a storm that belonged entirely to her. Her phone vibrated once in her hand. She lifted it calmly to her ear. A clear voice came through the speaker, audible to those nearest her. "Board authorization confirmed. Shall we execute termination of Stanton Holdings partnership?" Maya's answer carried like a bell. "Yes, effective immediately. Cancel all negotiations. Freeze every pending transfer. Remove Stanton Holdings from our ledger permanently." The words hit the ballroom like a detonation. A senator gasped. A banker dropped his glass. The sound of shattering crystal punctuated the silence that followed. Guests who had come to toast a $2.9 billion merger realized they were instead watching a dynasty bleed value by the second. Charles staggered forward, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this! Do you know who we are?" Maya's eyes locked on his, steady and sharp. "I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what you have just lost." Oh, behind her, applause rose again, not hesitant this time, but strong, unflinching. Guests who once whispered now clapped openly, some even standing. Cameras caught every second, the footage spreading beyond the ballroom before the Stantons could even grasp what was happening. The matriarch lunged with her words, spitting venom. "You think you can humiliate us? You think you can erase generations of power with a single phone call?" Maya's reply was colder than ice. "I did not erase you. You erased yourselves when you mistook cruelty for control. Tonight you struck me, insulted me, and tore up a contract that only I had the power to finalize. This was not my destruction. It was your confession." At that, her assistant's voice came through again. "Confirmation complete. Stanton Holdings locked out of Jordan Technologies system. Access revoked. Incident logged for legal review." Guests murmured louder now. A man in a navy suit said to no one in particular, "It is over. They are finished." Charles looked around, desperate for an ally, but saw only cameras and cold eyes. His family stood silent, their arrogance dissolved into fear. The empire that had ruled rooms for decades now looked small, cornered, and broken. And in the center of their collapse, Maya Jordan stood calm, her command final, her justice irreversible. She had not raised her hand, she had not shouted. Yet she had dismantled a dynasty with nothing but presence, precision, and truth. The Stanton ballroom no longer felt like a palace. It felt like a courtroom after a verdict. The chandeliers still glowed, but their brilliance only illuminated the shame of the family at the center of the storm. Charles Stanton stood frozen, his face pale, his fists clenched but powerless. The matriarch slumped in her chair, her earlier venom curdled into silence. Around them, the applause did not stop. It grew, wave after wave, until even the velvet curtains seemed to tremble with the sound. Maya Jordan did not bow. She did not smile. She lifted her chin, her eyes sweeping the room as if engraving every face into memory. Then she spoke, her voice measured, calm, and undeniable. "Tonight you struck me. Tonight you told me I did not belong. Tonight you believed that lineage made you untouchable. But power is not measured in old portraits or marble floors. Power is measured in truth. And truth has already left this room in the hands of every witness and every camera." Gasps and murmurs rippled, but none dared to interrupt. Maya's voice was steady, a verdict layered over centuries of silence. "You thought you could humiliate me and still collect $2.9 billion. Instead, you lost it with a single gesture. One slap cost you an empire, and it was not me who destroyed it. It was you." The young woman in silver gown lowered her phone for the first time, tears visible in her eyes. The crowd shifted, not in discomfort anymore, but in solidarity. Some clapped, some nodded, some simply stood to honor the calm figure who had turned humiliation into justice. Maya placed her phone back into her gown, turned toward the grand doors of the ballroom, and walked with slow, deliberate steps. The sound of her heels echoed like the strike of a gavel. Each step was not retreat but declaration. She was not leaving in disgrace, she was leaving in command. At the threshold, she paused once. Without turning back, she left them her final words. "I do not need to record this night. I am the record, and I am the result." The doors opened, the cameras followed. The Stantons sat in silence, their dynasty collapsing under the weight of their own arrogance. And as Maya Jordan walked into the cool night air beyond the ballroom, the world watching through every glowing screen understood a single truth. Dignity does not beg, and justice does not shout. It simply stands, unmoved, until the room itself confesses.